lessons learned from the 2021 rookie class. And one of the things, Jordan, that we're going to be discussing this week on the Football Guys Dynasty Show is about addressing need or the best player available in your specific draft class.
Yeah, talk about a lesson learned from the 2021 class, which was don't address running back or don't address quarterback need in drafts. And I mean, Mac Jones being the quarterback 5 off the board, he's the highest scoring quarterback at quarterback 19 this year. Davis Mills substantially later than that in cost. He's quarterback 29, which is, oh, by the way, ahead of the second pick in the draft, the third pick in the draft, and the 11th pick of the draft, right? And he went in the third round. So, Trevor Lawrence, the most pro-ready guy, generational quarterback 22, right? And so when you look at those things, trying to address need at the quarterback position is a total it's absolutely fool's gold. And the other thing too is I would say is, trying to preserve their value can be really tough. I mean, if you have a high-end quarterback asset in a rookie draft, instead of taking them and stashing them and hoping they preserve value long term, use the value right then, right? Pivot. Could you have gotten Matthew Stafford in a first for Trevor Lawrence? I bet you could have. Could you have gotten more than that for Aaron Rodgers? Yes, I bet you could have. Doing those types of deals is absolutely a tactic I think we need to use going forward in rookie drafts, especially when we have quarterbacks up there. Don't address need with them. And we know, and one of the things that we really know is that quarterbacks without a history of production really underperform quarterbacks that have a history of production at the same cost, right? So if guys are going around the same cost in startup drafts, you take the guys that have done it versus the guys that haven't done it. And we saw them go way too high, and they're still going way too high. I mean, quarterbacks that haven't done it in the top 10 of the NFL draft are top 10 of startup ADP are just a disaster. So that's just stuff you can't do. So those are the lessons that I've really learned. I think the headline lesson that I've learned from this past year.
Yeah, looking back at my big board for 2021 and quarterback high, but yet I was pretty tepid compared to the market, and it's a really good reminder because we had mobile options. Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson was mobile, Trevor Lawrence is mobile, Mac Jones is pretty much the non-mobile guy. And when you say I'm filling a need, I am looking to supplement the position, we really have an entire quintet of unknowns. When you talk about what's the upside here, we've talked offline about Mac Jones. Like, what's the upside fantasy wise? Like, there could be, greater NFL upside. We always talk about, greater NFL player versus fantasy player, and there are divides at the various skill positions. But when you talk about a historic 5 players in the top 15 of the NFL draft, and yet we come out of year one of having 0 guys that were prominent fantasy options in year one, and the assumption that they're insulated, and frankly they are. I mean, I can't believe how high Trey Lance is going, Justin Fields is going, when basically they've either had incomplete grades or, I mean, between the two of them, they have not played much. And the fact that they're going so high, and you mentioned the proven versus unproven, the veterans of 30 plus years old getting 0 respect and being Rodney Dangerfields of the position. And yet everyone wants to gravitate towards the rookies, second year players that are possibilities. And it's high variance. The intrigue is, what if they hit big? And I think they are great litmus tests and talking points and lessons learned, as we mentioned at the top of the show, for this year, a lot of the talk about the NFL draft is that QB1 would be QB6 of last year's draft class. And yet, what's going to happen this year, Jordan? The QB1 is going to go, top 3, 4, 5 of rookie drafts. That could be based on a class, but that's just based on quarterback in Superflex having that positional value and going requisite high level, even though this could be a class. It kind of reminds me of the Jake Locker, Christian Ponder year, where it's like you get there really is no go-to guy, or you get guys pushed up that they go, number 8, number 10, number 12 overall in the rookie draft. And it just feels those years. And yet because we have older quarterbacks that folks want to devalue. Now we have a 2021 and now an incoming 2022 class that are going to get elevated on age alone.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the other thing I think is going to be really interesting from this, especially when you look at this class again. I've done zero work on rookies. I'm waiting till after Valentine's Day to do that. That's my pledge to myself this year, is to wait until February 15th to start the rookie draft stuff. But my impression of it at this point is that we're going to have a lot of wide receivers, and I mean, people want to
doesn't
talk
feel
about
great, right, Jordan?
No, a bad quarterback class with heavy wide receivers. It's like I'm out, And so I think there's a lot of ways to pivot off of that. We'll talk about that a lot going forward. But I think in the context of it's always a sucker's bet, right? And people are down on the class right now until there's a whole bunch of wide receivers that they can draft in rookie drafts, right? Until you start seeing all these guys
5 wide receivers in round 1 and everyone's excited.
Totally. If you start seeing these guys run around in tights, and then all of a sudden everyone gets excited for the draft. So I mean, we still have plenty of time for that, and I think it will happen. We will get the easiest thing to do in terms of improving your rookie draft hit rate is just don't draft wide receivers in the first round of the rookie draft. You just do it randomly besides that, and you're better. So those are simple things that I think you can avoid doing. And I think the combination of a bad quarterback class this year, which looks like as we sit here, on February 1st, combined with what could be a really good wide receiver class, is going to make it's going to be, like shooting fish in a barrel, trading down, moving out for picks. I think that's going to be probably a big recommendation, I'd imagine, come May.
Yeah, I was looking back at my big board for last year, and I was actually firmly about a half a round above the market on Elijah Mitchell, and yet I ended up with 0 shares. And the Trey Sermon, Elijah Mitchell, 49ers backfield, Raheem Mostert seems like a relic, at this point in time. But let's face it, I mean, back last May, June, he was the incumbent. He was the running back 1 at that point in time. And we really didn't know what was going to happen beyond that. We figured Trey Sermon was going to be in the mix and what happens beyond there. But I will say the Kyle Shanahan and kind of evaluating situational factor, because I was definitely, I've sold some shares, in some consolidation type moves with Trey Sermon, but I was big on Sermon, moving to 6, moving to 7, of some of these drafts in one quarterback, that acquiring the player that I thought, oh, well, he has the most pedigree in a backfield that's relatively uncertain. And I think there wasn't enough bang for the buck. The difference between Javonte Williams at 5, and I did trade up to Javonte Williams at 5, versus Trey Sermon at 6, 7, 8, that there was. I mean, we look now, and there's a pretty pronounced difference. Obviously, Trey Sermon going into the doghouse, and again, really didn't get much of a fair shake, and Elijah Mitchell running with that job, Raheem Mostert getting hurt. But Javonte Williams being a guy that I think is a little overrated, a little overcooked in Dynasty right now, but still you have a lot of market liquidity, a lot of options there. And so I think that difference between late day 2 versus Javonte Williams going early day 2 and having a much better profile, I think that is one thing about just where are the tier lines. And that is one that I observed. I did get inside of that for Javonte Williams at times, but my focus was more on the let's get to the Trey Sermon zone, more so than the let's get to the Javonte Williams, which may have been about equal cost at 105 versus 6 or 7 in last year's draft.
The interesting thing about, we have these rules, or we have these situations that we then name later on, right? So I think we go back, and it's the Tony Pollard, Mike Weber scenario, where we were like pretty high on Mike Weber. We weren't that high on Tony Pollard. And there was a big difference. I mean, there was, I think, like 100 picks in the draft. I mean, something like that. I mean, it was a wide spread. I mean, it was 4th to, I think, 7th round, if memory serves, 6th, 7th round for Weber. I mean, it was and that's bridging tiers too. I mean, that's a big gap historically. But we had a prior on Weber that we were, whether that was some Devi some Devy residual in there, or what have you. We pre-draft like Weber, and then Weber fell. Pollard went higher than we expected, and I don't think we adjusted. So you had that gap open up. It's a similar gap to where, and it's actually probably bigger for Sermon to where Elijah Mitchell was odds wise. And so I don't necessarily, we can look back at that and say, it obviously didn't turn out right. But I don't think, like, when you look at those two situations, I don't think the right answer was to take the later guy. You know what I mean? I think it's interesting because in the Pollard situation, he was going at or later than Weber, and he went much earlier in the actual NFL draft when there was a gap between Sermon and Mitchell. That and we've seen that in some other cases too. I don't know how. That I think that situation just broke against us more so than that's a rule to learn from. I don't know.
Well, I was going to say for Mitchell, the main thing for me though is Mitchell. When you talk about size and movement, that we've seen before where that just if you're an athlete, you can kind of figure it out at running back.
Sure.
Put the ball in your belly and figure out how to make a guy miss. And I still don't think Elijah Mitchell is that great of a running back. But when you combine that with Kyle Shanahan,
easy.
The propensity though to who's the guy that I trust, and every single guy has a shot. We saw that with Raheem Mostert in previous years, right? Coming from the relative pedigree ether. And I think Elijah Mitchell, it's not that I was drafting Trey Sermon. I do think though that not pounding Elijah Mitchell in round 4 of rookie drafts where he was highly accessible, because that kind of fits the mantra, right? Late, especially 3rd, 4th round rookie picks. What do you want to do? You want something that by week 1 provides you some semblance of clarity, because you want to either get out or you want to say, I'm in for this roster spot. And that's one thing that we did get clarity coming out of week 1 with ease. We didn't know maybe what was going to happen in week 1 specifically, but we knew really early with that roster spot of how we feel about it. So that is one thing that I still think, Trey Sermon, now he's going to go for a song. But I still think he has a puncher shot of being one of those reclamation projects of, now he's fallen through the floor and now he's actually a buy, and you just accumulate more shares. And that doesn't mean you have to sit here and need your hands about, the 107 you spent on him in other leagues. But I do think now a lot of people are going to be running for the hills, and yet he has a reasonable chance of being an injury away option with their free agency clarity in that backfield for 2022.
Totally. Yeah, and you can basically drive down the average price of your acquisition of him by buying now. You know what I mean? I mean, you can get him for, what is it, late seconds, third, something like that.
Dollar cost average, yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the wide receivers, I love the point you made a few minutes ago, which is wide receivers don't define much of anything, for a rookie class. A lot of times it's a slow starting position. We'll see if there's a trend of that changing a little bit. But I look back, and the one thing I look at 2021 is Jalen Waddle. The fact that he was kind of in the mix, and we've said before that, round 1, it's kind of tough to decipher between 3, 4, 5 guys at wide receiver on who's going to be the best. But Jalen Waddle, the tea leaves of the Dolphins traded up for him. He went 1 pick, I believe, after Jamar Chase, and yet he was kind of in the mix with Rashad Bateman, Devonta Smith, Rondale Moore. I mean, it was a relative scrum there, late 1st, early 2nd, and yet Jalen Waddle, obviously in retrospect, looks like the clear value when you see where he's valued now, less than 12 months later.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that there is a lot of. I mean, I think the key lesson for the wide receiver position that I've learned in the past, 12 to 18 months, I guess, would be that we don't get it right via ADP at wide receiver. Like, it's not predictive of success in those within the first round guys, right? It doesn't decipher anything. And so when you apply that, right, if people want to trade up to draft a wide receiver, that's a bad mistake historically. And so being on the opposite side of that and taking the 2-for-1 bet is something that I think is a really good idea, right? Could you have gone from, for example, last year, Bateman to Waddle and Tony? I think that was a gettable return if you wanted to do it in a rookie draft. I think you could have done that. Could you have done that for Sermon, right? Could you have done those sorts of things? And those are similar historic bets, right? just from an odds basis, that they would have been pretty close, and you're getting 2 shots instead of 1. I still think that the Sermon bet was the right bet. It just turned out wrong. But I think about ways to pivot off of that. That's a way to, I think, have done it. And so I look forward to situations where we're going to play that again, right? And if this is going to be a year where there's going to be 5, 6, 7 guys, right, just arbitraging them and just taking the last one and just being the tax collector on everybody else wanting to trade up and everyone else wanting to make big, bold bets, and you just sort of you let it slide and grab 2 of them or grab 1 in future assets, right? I mean, I think that's a way to go that just can really exploit some of this uncertainty at the position.
Yeah, and I look back into especially beyond the first couple of rounds of rookie drafts, at those wide receivers. Buyer beware, my friend. And whether they had day 2 pedigree or not, I mean, we're talking about Tutu Atwell, didn't play. Amari Rodgers, special teams, really didn't play much on offense. Dwayne Eskridge, he was hurt a little bit. Tylan Wallace, completely buried. Josh Palmer, buried. We'll see what happens this next year. Jalen Darden, Des Fitzpatrick. I mean, you just had a litany of guys that, I mean, it's tough. Wide receiver is tough. It's tough to carve your niche. It's tough. I mean, frankly, you got to be in the top 2 of a depth chart to even really care about you fantasy-wise. And so when you ask a rookie to do that and really give us an incentive to roster you into year 2, I mean, all of those guys, maybe Josh Palmer would be the one that you kind of squint and say, if Mike Williams doesn't come back and you got the Justin Herbert influence, that's the one out of all those where you go, yeah, I don't feel super dirty about drafting you 9 months ago now and holding you. And now, I mean, just the slog and the anchor and the chain that is holding you down with that roster spot where you draft one of those guys at like 310 and it's like you think you're smart and yet the utility of that roster spot, and we could talk about it all the time, that just you got to have a very short-term lens, and wide receiver is not the way to do that. And frankly, tight end generally isn't either.
Yeah, totally. I drafted John Bates just because I was like, oh, look, the number, you know what I mean? He's going way later than his pedigree should suggest. And like, he was actually usable, but the question is again, like, how much did it
what
matter?
Does it mean?
Right. I mean, it's Dynasty existentialism, right? Like, what does it all mean? Yeah, I mean, that's the key thing. And so I think about going back again, sort of incorporating what you said earlier about taking that Elijah Mitchell shot. Usually we do that more. And I wasn't a huge fan of Mitchell, the player, coming out, which is probably part of the reason why I wasn't on him as much as would have been in prior years. But yeah, that usability later on, or trade those picks, right? I mean, it's and even in a 28-man roster, if it's super flex and tight end premium and you're doing it right, those picks can be really tight on your roster come even, August. So I do think that's another option here that I've learned to sort of incorporate in my strategy a little bit more.
Yeah. And if you're in a 35, 40-man roster, it's a different discussion. It's a whole different animal for that format. So you just have to know, and you have to kind of sculpt. And that's why we commonly use these monikers and these asterisks for some of the things we're saying, because a 20-man roster, 25-man roster versus 35, 40 is a completely different discussion. And that's why, we're in a 40-man roster together. And that's a completely different stash and hold, and having a threshold for patience for roster spots that is extremely high. And yet in most dynasty leagues, I would argue 90%, it is not close to that deep. And it is really, you get to week 2 and it's already like you're getting a little scratchy, you're getting a little itchy, and you're like, oh, I gotta move on from this roster spot. If you're paying attention to the changing landscape of NFL depth charts and what could benefit you in the next month. And that's really what 3rd, 4th round rookie picks are. And that's why we've said before, and some of my favorite trades have been when I trade, 305 for Alexander Mattison. Why? Because I know I'm going to hold on to Alexander Mattison for the near future of just, I'm waiting for that injury. I'm waiting for that hand grenade to go off, rolling it down the hallway. And if it doesn't, I'm still holding, but yet you draft a wide receiver, Diami Brown. And it's like, well, what does that mean? If Terry McLaurin goes down, it doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. So that's the tough part of like, Okay, that happens. Well, I still don't know. And then something else happens. Okay, I still don't know. Is Diamond Brown good? I don't know. Like you just keep going down this rabbit hole, but it's like Alexander Madison. Is he good? I think so. If Dalvin Cook gets injured, does it matter? Absolutely. So it's like it's a very easy sort of or decision tree. And I think a lot of people don't explore, and I've said that transparency myself of, you get to rookie picks and you constantly think, let me be the smartest guy in the room and let me draft a rookie because it's a rookie draft. And yet a lot of times I think the smart move is to say, well, what veteran could I get? Because that's probably a better chance to actually provide value this year.
Yeah. I think that's I think that's a great call and a good strategy and something I need to do more and more of for sure.
All right, Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 89 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I want to remind you this time of year. Yep, we've got one NFL game left. It is the Super Bowl in a couple weeks, but NFL news is not at a loss here. So you want to make sure you sign up for that Football Guys daily email update. Updated and called by Joe Bryant. And that means heading into NFL free agency, all the moves we care about the most, that could be workouts, that could be things from the Senior Bowl, the NFL Combine, as I mentioned, NFL free agency coming up. And that means you're going to have it in your inbox. Go to the right side at the top of the homepage at footballguys.com and sign up for that daily email update. And we've got some dynasty trades this week, and one of them involving a high upside. It seems like it's 2 years in a row now with Mr. Gabriel Davis. And he's coming off 200 plus yards, I believe 4 touchdowns. He just scored again, by the way, 5th touchdown there for the Bills. Gabriel Davis traded for a 2023 first round pick. And I guess I would ask, is it super flex? And the answer is doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You're taking the pick. So now that we got that out of the way, how the heck so the Bills play, like Josh Allen has played 2 like A plus games against Mahomes and lost the past 2 years. And Cincinnati gets away with like a B minus performance in Arrowhead and wins. Like, I mean, I was despondent.
Can't feel good.
I was despondent.
That actually made you feel worse, right?
I know. Yeah. I was like, hey, at least we got beat by the best team. But then they played like garbage.
Well, they went from 9 sacks to 0. So that obviously helped them. Joe Burrow turned into Russell Wilson navigating the pocket and getting out of pressure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was literally laying there and just like,
yeah. Like, well, we talked about it before the show that I really do believe that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, it seems like they think it's easy. And yet we're going to look back in 5 to 10 years and be like, it might be Aaron Rodgers. Like, it'd be like, they won how many Super Bowls? They got to how many Super Bowls? Because, I mean, they played lights out for 29 minutes, 29 and a half minutes. And then they just completely bobble, that closing sequence, don't even get a field goal to close the first half. And then, let's just not really play. Let's try to coast to the finish here. And it cost you, and it's going to cost you in a highly competitive AFC. You can't bring that C- game, and you can't bring that we're going to play for a half against some of these strong quarterbacks that are coming to take out the king. And Patrick Mahomes, you're the king, but you know what? Your crown is very tarnished. And yeah, I didn't even think about that angle that you mentioned, Jordan, that, Bills, you're like, man, we threw haymakers and we got haymakers. And the Bengals kind of get through. We've seen this before in
slap boxing match.
In dynasty leagues, right? Where you're like, you put up a big score and you're like, because the next week, a little bit of regression, you're like, it might only take, a C- effort. And that's exactly what happened against the Bengals. So Gabriel Davis, though, is last year, I remember in January, February, we talked about that. Oh, his ADP, you look by ADP, it's like 203, 204, like early second. And yet the couple places I had him, I couldn't get a sniff of that. Right. But it seems like the market is going to be even hotter this year with Emmanuel Sanders, a free agent, and obviously Josh Allen being the riser of all tides. And if Gabriel Davis is going to be the wide receiver 2, I'll still say put a little pin in that because that is no guarantee. They may still address the position in free agency.
Yeah, and I think Colby's is going to be a cut candidate too. Almost assuredly going to be a cut candidate if he's not a big time restructure. So it is going to open up. Like there will be an avenue at least for a moment in time. I don't think they're going to stay there and hang out and not. I I would be surprised if it was Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and someone that wasn't close to Gabe Davis as being the top 3 wide receivers, right? If that's someone off waivers, if they bring back Emmanuel Sanders or free agency, I should say, and there's, I think, a lot of different exploratory type guys that they could do that with too.
That should be an appealing situation too for
right.
any free agent to go in and say, well, a pass air raid offense with Josh Allen, and there's accessibility to the number 2 role.
Right. Rob Gronkowski could be an option. Yeah. I mean, you look around, like there are a lot of different ways that this.
But it's the assumption. He said, here, when I do my analysis, here's the brass tacks, and you can point to specific games and say Gabriel Davis is going to be great. And look, he's big and he's had some good games. The point is, through 2 years, when you look at what he's done for the season, subpar. Mm-hmm. He is not on some transcendent high-level path. And when you combine that with day 3, it is highly suspect, and you definitely shouldn't be giving up first-round picks for him. And this is the absolute, like, you're chasing situation, chasing recency. And if you want to give 210 for him, sure. But a lot of times, this is the way to hemorrhage value by pinning your hopes on a day 3 guy that's had flashes over the first couple of years. It is buyer beware and stranger danger.
Yes.
All right, next one. And this is a big boy deal. This is called addressing weaknesses. This is trading a prominent player that has a little bit of tarnish, coming out of the season. Super flex, 2 PPR for tight ends, but it is start 1. We've got Dak Prescott being traded by a team that is strong at quarterback. So Dak Prescott is arguably QB3 for them, for Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts addresses a big need position for them, and they're trading again. They're QB3 or so. So super flex, 1 tight end, but 2 PPR. What are your thoughts on this?
So I want to caveat this with the fact that what strong at quarterback means. If this is strong at quarterback and it is 2 quarterbacks that are actually better than Dak Prescott. Okay. So, and the universe of players that belong in that category include and are basically limited to Mahomes, Allen, and Herbert. Right. I mean, like that's the trio of guys. You would have to have 2 of them for that to be true, in my opinion. If that is the case, right, if that is what strong at quarterback means, I can see a pivot like this. If that is not what strong at quarterback means, I can't move down off a quarterback for Pitts. Like I don't, even though I know the tight end premium,
well, they had
it matters.
The 2 quarterbacks
I play in them.
The 2 quarterbacks are Herbert and Burrow that they have otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I would move. I think I would move Burrow. I would do Burrow for Pitts straight up. I would do that. I wouldn't do Prescott. I have okay. Prescott a tier ahead of Burrow, and I honestly I think you could probably get maybe more for Burrow on the Pitts side.
Well, you could have got Pitts plus, yeah. I mean, it's one tight end, so I get the premium scoring, and I get that you kind of want to be. And again, this is low level example, but you want to be the smartest guy in the room, right? You're getting Pitts on what he did as a rookie. Obviously, he's on the precipice. If he builds upon that, heck, if he just has touchdown regression, he's going to be in the top 2, 3, 4 discussion for next year in production. So I get all that, but I'm not really willing to, like, if Mac Jones is your QB3, like I traded Mac Jones in the past few weeks, like I get that, but that's a ceiling question. And I really feel like if you go 3 deep at quarterback, even if you have 3 strong options like here, that's still, in my opinion, in Superflex, not strong enough to be like, oh yeah, let me just offload one. If this was 2 tight end, I'm fine doing something like this. Absolutely fine.
Right.
But the fact that it's 1, that to me is a big differentiator. And I think Pitts, I have him as my tight end 1 in Dynasty. I think he can be, he absolutely validates being aggressive. He, let's face it, he was aggressive last year in rookie drafts for a round 1 tight end. So Prescott to me, like what I don't like, and you kind of mentioned it with selling Burrow instead. I feel like Prescott is like a depressed asset right now that if you trade him, you're not getting full value. Because ADP is what? Quarterback 5, 6, 7. I mean, he's falling below the tier 1, tier 2 line for all the young guns. And yet Prescott is not old. He's produced well. And, there's some question about him, and I'm not really sure why. It's probably the recency bias and finishing the season on a high note sort of thing. So
Right.
I really feel like Prescott isn't the guy to get the best bang for your buck on the marketplace.
Yeah, I would say in this format, which I believe that this format is actually the Safe Leagues format. I believe that's where this trade actually took place. Mark Andrews, who was the tight end one this year, was the 5th highest scorer in the format, behind Josh Allen, Cooper Kupp, Tom Brady, and Justin Herbert. So if you were to sort of put Pitts as a projection being around there, I mean, you are looking at a really premium asset. And honestly, it's at a position that's more durable than running back. So if you sort of are going to put them against each other, I can see that type of level. I just think that when you sort of look at, there's different ways to sort of get at that. There's only so many quarterbacks that have elite high-end profiles like Prescott does, and Burrow doesn't qualify yet. So I still have questions about Burrow. Is subject to, I think, a lot of variance in a negative sense next year that I think could really come down on him just because it's the volume's not that high. It gives me some concern. So all that's to say, I would do this for Burrow. I wouldn't for Prescott.
And the other thing I would point out is it gets previous to 1 to 2 years ago, a quarterback falls off. And so this whole I'm so great at the position. Like, look at me. I can afford to deal away one of these strong options and to look Dak Prescott in the mouth and say, whatever. Like, I'll just deal you away. So I get that. I will say this. So because I'm looking at some of the tierings here, and I mean, it gets kind of dicey. And again, if you're not in on this price tag on guys like Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence and Trey Lance, which I am not, and then you get some rookies in the mix. I mean, well before QB 20, it gets dicey. And so to say you have 3 of those, in the top 8 to 10, and you're going to give one up, be careful. One season-ending injury, and all of a sudden you have exactly the number you need,
right.
with no bye weeks.
Right.
So I will say, though, that I think in general, and I'm including myself in this, not enough people will value correctly of I can take a loss on a deal and address a weakness for a position. So if you're weak at tight end, Kyle Pitts is such a massive upgrade from playing in the weeds and having a committee type situation. It could be 5, 7, 10 points per game upgrade, depending on, again, 2 PPR for tight end. If Pitts takes any step forward, massive upgrade over just playing the roulette wheel and playing streamers. So again, I don't think this is the right deal, but I think this is the right mindset of saying, I'm a contender. Let me get better at tight end. Now, is the better buy someone like Dalton Schultz or finding a veteran that's 30 plus years old? Is Gronkowski a 3rd round pick because people worry he's retired? Like, there's a lot of moves to make, but I think, and again, up until the last 12 months or so, I've been resistant to lose a trade, but address my weakness, and it can graphically help your lineup. And I think if you have a weakness, and I think tight end is a pretty easy one, work this off season. It doesn't have to be a blockbuster like this, but work to make a trade that tangibly upgrades your lineup by the time week 1 gets here. You have a long time to do it, but don't just ignore it and say the position doesn't score well, it doesn't matter, because probably in the top 5, 8, 10 of the position, there is someone that will be affordable and available and accessible by one of your league mates that you can acquire for less than you think, and it really helps your team.
Yeah, and I think the other thing on this lens is just look at how valuable an elite quarterback can get, and if you get the chance to get one, look at what it can get you, right? And I'm looking at you, Deshaun Watson. You know what I mean? That's the level of asset that can get you. So if you're willing to sort of make a trade and go out and be aggressive at a discount price on one of these quarterbacks, right, when they rehab their value, this is what you can do. So I think to keep that in mind. By the way, I counted quarterbacks and teams that I was confident in 2023, 13. 5 of those are rookies from last year. I gave them all. I just passed them through. So basically, outside of that, there was 8 guys that I felt confident team and quarterback the same in 2023 as they are right now.
I'm giving you the Michael Scott face. I don't know about this.
Yeah.
13. That seems like the lowest number we've had in quite some time.
Yeah, and I mean,
I remember a couple of years ago we were at like 22 to 24.
Right.
It's dying.
Right.
It's dying on the vine. It's a withering grape, Jordan.
And there are guys that I think will be starters, like Rodgers, for example.
Right.
Derek Carr,
Ambiguity.
Ryan Tannehill, Kirk
Ambiguity.
Cousins, right? Like, so there's 4 or 5, maybe 6 other guys in there that would qualify as multiple years, but not with the same team, right? So when you start looking at that, like there's a ton of uncertainty.
Well, there's risk when you start changing teams too. So that's the other like you all of a sudden the multi-year great allegiance by your current incumbent team is gone. Wheels up. I mean, again, just the ins brakes are off of that situational train. So you just have to be careful. All right, we got one more here. FFPC, 1 quarterback. We got James Conner for 207. And just a reminder for folks that FFPC, I mean, this is cut down time of year. So you'd have to cut 4 and maybe even possibly more if you have IR spots for positional players to cut down to 14 of those skill position players on your roster.
That's exactly where I went with this deal. That if you told me, in a 28-man roster, I think I'd take the Conner side of this. But if you were like, hey, I'm close, and if this is going to be a close call, and Conner's going to be, 12, 13, 14 on my roster, and they're 12 through 16 is close, and I need to do something. I think that's fair for Conner. I think this is an entirely format dependent type trade.
Yeah, I kind of like it just because I'm kind of looking out into the vast wilderness of 1 quarterback 207. And honestly, I don't think 207 is going to be different than 307 or 310 this year in FFPC. And I think a lot of people overrate that. I think first rounders are pretty insulated for your roster, but man, is it a redrafty sort of game in FFPC. So I would rather take Conner, we saw him land in a situation this past offseason where we thought, oh, what's this going to be like? Chase Edmonds, that's a lot of allegiance for Edmonds. They only, quote unquote, only brought in James Conner, and Conner basically lapped him. I mean, the more the season progressed, even with Edmonds coming back from injury, it was like, oh, this James Conner guy, he's pretty good. Yeah, this guy with a multi-years of NFL starterhood under his belt, guy can play. Shocker. Who knew? So I would rather take that profile than 207 right now. I do think, like you said, the where is he on the keeper line is important. If you're dropping someone of equal prominence, then you definitely want to keep the pick, stay flexible, stay liquid, and just know that Conner is the type that maybe you get into the draft, and that's where then you can make a secondary decision, trade back from maybe 207, still pick up Conner because someone is looking to just shed a spot. Maybe they have extra picks or whatever, but I do like the value, just raw value, because I think at worst he's going to be an injury away guy and one of the prominent guys that you want. And he could even be one of those bridge guys that picks up a lead role for a week 1 in free agency this coming off season. So I like the player, but I think, again, the shallower it is, you just need to be careful if this is the right time to make the deal, because this is probably the value, or maybe even a little less if roster spots are tight.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, we got a couple of Dynasty quotes from the Footballguys forum. You can check out the Shark Pool. There's a ton of completed Dynasty trades, also some good, vibrant discussion on specific players there that you can check out by going to the Shark Pool message boards at footballguys.com. I think the real way to get ahead of the competition in Dynasty is to plant a flag and go after a guy, not wait until after he completely blows up and his value doubles.
I mean, in theory, right? If we could do that, that'd be great. I think
crystal ball theory.
I mean, it's hard to do that. I mean, yes, it'd be great.
Every team building philosophy works, Jordan, if you pick the right guys.
Just
running
Dynasty
running
101.
back heavy,
pick the right
running
guys.
back light.
Right. Pick the right guys. It works. So I would say I'm a little bit more open to buying quote high on guys. And so if you sort of look at what that might mean, not necessarily, but I sort of look at it as buying on the way up, right? And you catch it, a guy like Cooper Kupp this year, maybe a guy like Debo. You sort of, you get a good couple weeks and people are like, oh, look, I can cash out at a profit. When in reality, it's not an uptick for them. It's a new normal, right? And that's that is something I am really interested in sort of studying more, because I do think that is a valid, done right. I think that's actually a valid value adding strategy of player acquisition. So that's something I think about doing. I'm really careful though about planting huge flags on players, especially now. It's February. I could give you a list of projections from last February that would have sounded like really easy, and none of them are true. So just be really careful about the takes that you're investing hugely in on at this point in the calendar. And if you're going to do that, do it for absolute premium positions. Like pay up for Patrick Mahomes, pay up for an elite quarterback, go buy Justin Herbert at what you think is a high price. Like do those deals because they're actually insulated right now, versus going out and adding, I don't know, situational running back here, right? Or adding, buying Barkley, you know what I mean? Or whatever. Like it's a more middling thing where you don't have a ton of security on that situation. I think definitely go towards higher end insulated assets at this time of the calendar.
Yeah, the one I think back that I can't believe I was so one-sided on this was the Robert Woods was my acquisition for the Rams offense and not Cooper Kupp. And they were pretty, 1A, 1B, some sort of order there. And yet I still think back, to seeing him at the Senior Bowl, and he was uncheckable. He was uncoverable. And the fact that wouldn't meld with a quarterback upgrade, and Robert Woods was more of the manufactured touch or hybrid, almost playing the Deebo Samuel type of role, within that offense of a hybrid player, playing some running back, playing some, end arounds and speed options and all those types of things. And I just, the fact that Cooper Kupp was a similar price and obviously divergent outcomes there, which would speak to the, make sure if you're investing in a quarterback or investing in an offense, maybe you want to split it around a little bit more, was one thing I thought about with that Rams situation, Matt Stafford. I'm starting to warm to the idea of buying low on Laviska Shenault.
I'm not.
Oh no.
I just look at him and he hasn't done. You either by year 2 are really showing indicators of being a productive player, or you're not, especially at wide receiver.
This year was pretty depressing, was it not? I mean, Laviska Shenault was like, and I know there's a lot of things. I will say Jacksonville is one of those situations that you say, man, systemically, was it super toxic? And it's just like, it wasn't going to happen. Or do you say, there's a lot of overrated things all combining in this giant cauldron of overvaluedness, that is like, they may be better in the coming year or two, but it still is not going to meet the expectations of Trevor Lawrence transcends everything. And then Laviska Shenault is going to be this two-way player that, is a unicorn at the position, and they're going to add to the position. They've got Travis Etienne as a round one guy. And like, just, it seems like, and Travis Etienne at the top of the show was something I was going to add of like, did it really, one of my questions, and I know I'm totally hijacking this whole thing, but was Travis Etienne, if he had not gotten hurt, let me ask this, would it have mattered? Do you honestly think Travis Etienne getting hurt would have mattered?
In terms of their offense?
Well, no, but would he have been the starter? James Robinson is like, go sit over there, your injury away status. And then Etienne would have been what? I mean, the team wasn't good.
Right.
The team wasn't good. The offense wasn't good. I mean, Trevor Lawrence looked like a good / functional player in week 18. I mean, he had one or two other starts where he was decent, honestly. So Etienne being healthy or not, what does that do? So I honestly think Etienne would have been hurt by playing. he's actually aided because of the mystical
Didn't do
what he
anything.
would have been. Right. It's an
Right.
incomplete grade, not a
Rather than a failure.
negative.
Right.
Right. Like Laviska Shenault right now is getting a failure grade, right?
Yeah.
ETN got an incomplete. And Trevor Lawrence is insulated just because, he's going to be transcendent. We just need to be patient. But like Shenault, I feel like I was pretty depressed watching him this year.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a pretty picture. It looked like a guy that wasn't getting any targets outside of 10 yards. Everything was manufactured and short. And it's like, can this guy run a route? Right. Can this guy do anything? And it's not like, DJ Chark was out. Marvin Jones is nice, but he's like 32. He's not a part of their plans. And so Shenault should have had every opportunity, and it really turned into a whole lot of nothing. So that, like you said, where's the indicators? Where's the splash, game of 6 for 100 and a touchdown?
Right.
Like, where are those moments of you say, well, we just needed to see it a little more often in 2022. That's my biggest thing with Shenault. I still think he's a unicorn in terms of size, but you know what? I kind of wonder, different than Deebo Samuel and some of these other guys, I don't think Shenault moves well enough. Like, I don't think, he's a bigger guy, but I just don't think he's got enough juice. And he's just sort of a big, slogging guy. That's one of my biggest concerns. Like, I just think he's kind of a lumbering running back out there, and good luck. Good luck unless you get force-fed the ball.
Yeah, I mean, and so I look at his range, and Keep Trade Cut has him at wide receiver 53. I mean, 54 is Corey Davis. I think that's a much clearer bet in how that goes. 59 is Russell Gage, who, I mean, that's a much, like, we've seen that, right, for basically 2 yards per route run this year. There are guys after him. I mean, heck, Kenny Galladay has shown more, I think, than Laviska Shenault is, and I'm not even the biggest Kenny Galladay fan. Will Fuller
is
Jarvis
healthy
Landry
for 1 year, right?
Heck, Cordero Patterson, right? I mean, is going later at the wide receiver position than Laviska Shenault is, and so I just think that's a wasteland for me. I'm either going to shoot for guys that'll produce at that cost, and I'm looking for guys that have done it already, or I'm just
and don't even start us on the conversation of versus other positions. I mean, we're just talking wide receiver, but I mean, yeah, the interesting running back profile bets, in that zone are probably pronounced as well. So yeah, Shenault, it's basically, he's a young guy, and you say he's locked in with Trevor Lawrence, and I guess the hope is that that they have a complete whitewash. But like, it's not like Jacksonville has any sort of pedigree of anything. So you're hoping for Trevor Lawrence to rise the tide, right?
Yeah.
So that's the one bet, is you say he's locked in contractually. Nobody else is in that passing game. And if Trevor Lawrence takes a step forward, he's the most logical bet to benefit to a requisite amount to make him in the 50s a good investment.
Right.
But I have no faith on what I've seen. The optics are not overly good. All right, last one here. IDP will never take off as a dynasty stalwart format.
I can't do it because, like, I go down a rabbit hole and then I'm 4 books deep. Right, that's the rabbit holes that I go down. So if I get an IDP, who knows what's going to happen? Right. I might never see my kids again. So it's not going to be a big thing for me. I don't. It's tough not to watch the ball. Right, I think that's the thing.
Yeah, that's true.
When you're playing football, or when
it is interesting though if you get, like, if you have IDP, like an IDP linebacker on your team, and you start watching him, it is pretty interesting. It's more like a novelty sort of thing of like, oh, I'm not used to watching the game like this. But yeah, not the whole, like, what is it? Get your eye off the ball or something. Right. There's some book or something like that of just training yourself to not to watch the entire play. I did a poll a while back, and I was actually a little surprised at the time that Devy was, it was basically like, what format do you play? And Devy was more popular or a higher vote getter than IDP. And I think the reason for that is Devy translates to everything you do in non-Devy, in the sense that it's future rookie drafting is all you're doing. It's like you're doing future evals for guys that will be a canvas across all of your other leagues. Now, IDP is a complete unicorn in that And I will say, I'm in a few IDP leagues, and it's like, I lean on, and again, shout out to John Norton and Gene Bramble and the great work that Football Guys staff do, because I lean on them heavily. And again, I don't feel like I'm behind at all. I don't scout IDP. I don't, I don't personally, do the don't watch the ball, when I'm watching all the games. And so, I mean, just their advice, blindly taking it, has made me above average in IDP in all of those leagues by playing the waiver wire, not doing a lot of trading, and systematically drafting when applicable in my rookie drafts. But I will say, it just adds, like you said, it opens up a box of, I'm not used to doing this. And because it's not like, okay, I don't play two tight end, but now I'm playing a two tight end. Well, you're still used to evaluating tight ends.
Right.
But IDP is literally, you're going into a universe where I haven't thought about mandatory defensive tackles in my entire life. And now I have to start one every single week.
Right.
That's a huge jump. And I will say, you can leverage that format just like you can leverage Devi, but I don't think, and same thing about Devi, I don't think Devi or IDP is on some trajectory to eventually become the go-to format. I don't think that's ever in the cards. Where 5 years ago, Superflex was not all that common. And now I would argue that when you talk about something, you actually have to clarify one quarterback or Superflex, because it is that ambiguous with what a format is if you don't mention it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Debbie also, people watch a lot of college football for preparing for rookie drafts, right? So I think that's an extension of that. And the other thing too is, like, I did a poll, earlier this week. What do you enjoy doing more in Dynasty? It was rebuilding or winning a championship, and 23% of people said rebuilding. Debbie fits right in line with that. Like, hey, I love building the non-productive portion of my roster, right? That's totally in line with that. So it shouldn't shock me that Debbie's, I think, if you are looking for a variant off of quote normal Dynasty, I think it's much more likely to be Debbie than it is to be IDP.
Can you extrapolate that just a little bit, because you kind of said that off the cuff, but that there
you're going to short circuit me, right?
No, that there is a cross section, and this isn't, this is sort of tongue in cheek, but that there is a cross section of Dynasty GMs out there that sort of like the process of team building, when the focus is not on the end result of, like, an NFL team hoisting the trophy at the end of the year in as many leagues as you possibly can in your portfolio, that they just kind of like the journey, or they kind of like the, what does my roster look like at any point in time, or these peripheral things, and not the end result of how well am I performing with the end result of, points and wins and making the playoffs, and then ultimately, how deep did I go in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a 20% chance to win a championship in your 12-team Dynasty League in 2022, are you trying to contend or rebuild? 77% of people said contend. That's almost 2.5x what it actually is, right? What a random odds are. Like, it's an incredible shot to win a championship. It's basically getting a bye, right? It's almost essentially guaranteed you get a bye, pretty close to it. And your answer is, 20, basically a quarter of people are like, nah, I might kick the can on the season. Like, that's a total miss on appreciating sort of odds and contending nature of teams and all that stuff. And I think that people have an inclination. Just this week I saw in a league that I'm in, someone posted, oh, I took over this team, total fire sale, selling the whole thing. And I looked at it's like Mahomes, like it's like, I think he had Pitts. And all of a sudden I'm like counting like 4 or 5 like top like 50 assets. And I was like, okay, like this should be a contending. Like you should go the other way. Like it's
the number of teams I've already encountered where it's like, oh yeah, I don't really know. Should I really be pointing toward contending? And I'm like, it's January. Like, right. What do you mean? Should you be pointing towards contending? Right. A, you have so long to go. B, you have some pieces here. C, your lineup is right there. D, you don't know how these running back situations are going to turn out. And just the fact that you want to slough off the current year when the current year is not at least 2 months in is mind-blowing to me.
Right.
I mean, we can say that time passes quickly and it's like, oh, your 26-year-old running back is going to be ancient and retired before you know it. Well, no,
Right.
time passes pretty slowly. Like
Yes.
let's earmark this, because let's earmark this moment where it's like, oh, the Chiefs just got ousted from the playoffs, and we got a Super Bowl, a couple weeks out. Let's remember this when we are only 12 months, 1 year of dynasty age tolling in the future, and how much has changed, right? Did anyone have Cooper Kupp? Like you just said, I mean, Cooper
Right.
Kupp is the number one game-changing, unstoppable wide receiver in the entire NFL 12 months ago. Who had that? How many people, especially, guess what? What were we, less than 18 months ago, Jonathan Taylor was underwhelming as a guy that couldn't see a hole in front of him if it was, you're trying to hit water off a boat, with throwing something off the side of it. And, he's underwhelming with Marlon Mack being out for the year and being in some big committee to being the number one overall running back, and we had Joe Burrow, injury prone, is even going to play in 2021. He just took his team to the Super Bowl. Just the number of things that change. And so this whole and it goes back to what we talk about, overreacting to quarterback age, or just maybe age in general, of like, oh my goodness, a guy's 27 years old. Well, Alvin Kamara could give you 2 more top 12 seasons. And how much does age matter then?
Right. Right.
If you want a title over the next 2 years, how much does that really matter? And I just think time passes quickly, but yet it still really doesn't.
Right.
We just had a whole season. We digested the whole thing. And yeah, we're going to get 7-8 months tolling with nobody playing games. But still, that regular season 13-14 games is going to seem like an entire lifetime in 2022 before the whole, oh, so-and-so is now 28 instead of 27.
Right. How much of a lifetime was 2020 ago? DeAndre Hopkins was wide receiver 4, Calvin Ridley wide receiver 5, Allen Robinson wide receiver 9.
Ridley. Yeah.
Keep going. Robert Woods wide receiver 11, Amari Cooper wide receiver 15, Juju Smith-Schuster wide receiver 16. Things change.
Yeah.
You know what doesn't change? Brandon Cooks wide receiver 17. So
lock and load.
Lock and load, baby. Mike Evans wide receiver 11. Some things don't change.
we should just have a new mantra or a new rule that Brandon Cooks, instead of saying his name, we're just going to say Rodney Dangerfield over and over again. He's just going to be Rodney Dangerfield.
Yeah. Mr. Top 20. Mr. Top 20.
WNBC. Yeah, it's going to be the Rodney Dangerfield every single time, because no one likes that guy. What is he, like, wide receiver 40 now?
Yeah.
Is that about right? Never going up.
A point worse than CeeDee Lamb this year.
Adam Arstead does that all the time, where he's like, there's some sort of nexus, right? When he's like, when Dynasty is higher than redraft, or redraft is higher than Dynasty, it's like an indicator, right?
Yeah.
I think it was if redraft is higher than Dynasty. Wasn't that it?
Yes.
Look to buy.
Yes.
Look to buy. Guys in 2-year windows right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
But Brandon Cooks over and over again. But he doesn't do it in different situations.
Right. Not versatile enough.
You know what? He was never wide receiver 1 overall. I think that's really what it is. I have this theory, Jordan. If you want a little prep project of guys that have been hyper productive, because Mike Evans fits this profile as well. Of you never get all the way home of being and I guess Mike Evans, it's been a little while, but it's like the recency of, if you weren't a top 5 wide receiver or something, then if you're old enough, it doesn't matter. You're just you're not that good. You're only wide receiver 10. You're only wide receiver 15. That doesn't count. That's not very good. For your age, that's subpar. So I think that's part of it, is just, if you're just really good all the time, but you're not phenom and transcendent, then you get lost in the weeds a little bit. And I think that's what happened with Brandon Cooks and Mike Evans and a few of these other guys, where just, you haven't been absolutely monster in the last year or two. And that's kind of what it is. You get lost. If you're 23, guess what? If you're AJ Brown, it's okay. For AJ Brown, it's okay. You get a lot of passes.
Yeah, a lot of passes.
Because you're young. You'll be awesome. You'll be awesome. I'm sure at some point he'll put up like a wide receiver 4 season, right? At some point. He better, right? Because that's his cost. That's his cost.
Hey.
God, AJ Brown. Again, I have nothing against him. He's a good player, but my goodness. Overvalue a guy based on what you haven't done. My goodness. All right. That's going to do it for this episode. We talked some dynasty trading. I think the Dak Prescott, Kyle Pitts addressing team needs. We talked about pedigree, Gabriel Davis there. And of course, we talked about lessons learned from the 2021 rookie class. I'm Chad Parsons. He's Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.